Hello there, my name is Cassidy Cash, that's Shakespeare Girl, and welcome to this week's episode of Did Shakespeare? We know that Shakespeare's works contained knowledge of specialized subjects like philosophy, science, history, and even math. But as famous a playwright as Shakespeare was, how did he know so much about these subjects? When modern writers want to learn about a subject that they're not specifically trained in themselves, they often go and study these subjects somewhere by talking to experts or even going to a library to make their plot lines and their characters more believable for a reader. Having written elaborate histories, tragedies, and comedies, some about facts and events that happened well before Shakespeare's time, we know that Shakespeare must have done some studying of some sort. But where did he learn it? Which brings us to this week's question, which is, did Shakespeare study in a library? Histories of libraries is a long one. The first recorded library that we know of was the Great Library in Alexandria, Egypt in the 4th century BC. There might have been some before then, but this is kind of the beginning of libraries. It was a massive collection of information that had been written down on tablets and stored on clay tablets in this just massive library. After the collapse of the Roman Empire, however, Alexandria was destroyed and the Great Library along with it. And what resulted was the few remaining manuscripts that survived this fire were kept and preserved by small monasteries, where monks meticulously would copy all of the content of the clay tablets over and over again to make copies and preserve this information. Now, as the monasteries grew and they started getting really efficient at this, they would amass a pretty big collection of information, and they would move obviously from clay tablets into paper manuscripts on scrolls. And so then they would have to locate this library of information somewhere else. And so they would store it at a larger monastery or even at universities. Humphrey, the Duke of Gloucester, first Earl of Pembroke, was brother to King Henry V, started one of the oldest libraries in Europe when Humphrey donated 281 manuscripts to Oxford University in the late 15th century. Inspired by his donation, Oxford decided to build a library to house both the books he had donated as well as to foster the growth and acquisition of additional manuscript collections. The library was opened over the Divinity School in 1488. By 1550, the library was all but destroyed when the Dean of Christ Church decided to rid the library of anything remotely Catholic. He burned many of the books and manuscripts that he found to be unsuitable or not fitting to the information he wanted housed there. The damage that was done was considerable, and at the time, the university lacked the money to continue that library. So in 1602, a man named Thomas Bodley, who was a courtier in Elizabeth I's court, stepped up to rescue the library, which is why we know it today as the Bodleian Library. It was one of the very first public libraries in Europe and is certainly one of the largest in England. In 1602, that's the same year that Shakespeare's Merry Wives of Windsor was first published. The following year, 1603, was the last time Shakespeare is recorded as acting on stage. The same Humphrey who donated the 281 manuscripts to start this library in the first place was featured in Shakespeare's Henry VI Part 1 and 2, and his character was given a smaller and equally favorable parts in Henry V and Henry IV Part 2. The monastic library started a library boom that sort of took off, and by the 15th and 16th centuries, it was popular for the learned and the humanists to have their own private libraries almost as a status symbol. collection of texts were considered luxury collectibles. And later, they held this reputation among the people who wanted to be seen as really smart as you've got this document that has a highly practical purpose of sharing information. So they were really, really valuable, both because they were coming out of a culture where written word was rare, and also because there was this growing respect for being educated. Queen Elizabeth herself is said to have held a high opinion of education, and particularly of the written text. She translated of her own accord, and not because she was like in a class or required to by some professor, but because she valued personal education. She actually translated some manuscripts from a foreign language into English, and she's credited in several libraries as having done this translation. Which brings me to the point as related to Shakespeare, is because we know from what Queen Elizabeth did and the history of her and her life and what she added that she valued personal education. Now, Shakespeare was basically working for Queen Elizabeth. She was a patron of Shakespeare. She paid him to perform these plays. Now, this was a highly political relationship. Shakespeare had to, like modern business people today, he had to consider the preferences of his audience. And in an atmosphere where there are tons of courtiers vying for the attention of the queen, you have to find a way to stand out and be noticed to keep your position as one of her patrons. Which would explain why he put so much knowledge into his plays, is because he wanted the stories to both be entertaining to the audience that was watching him and to send a message to the monarchs and royals and courtiers who were financing his business that he was highly educated, because he wanted to have that reputation with them. It's likely that Elizabeth can be credited with helping to usher in the library boom. The golden age of libraries is the 17th and 18th centuries, which Shakespeare was in the 17th century for a few years, and so it would have been beginning to grow during his lifetime and then really take off after his death. So this culture that Shakespeare was living in was one where he would have pursued personal education on his own, and the convenience and growth of libraries in and around where he was living and working suggests that, by all accounts, he really could have gone to a library to learn this information. Whether or not he actually did, well, we don't know, but certainly Shakespeare knew a lot, libraries were prevalent, and education was a priority. So it was one option available to Shakespeare for learning things, for sure. So as it turns out, this topic is huge. The idea of libraries in Renaissance England, the growth of libraries, and the golden age of libraries in the 17th and 18th century of England is massive. I had over 30 resource links that I looked into to put this together for you guys today and to tell you about libraries in Shakespeare's time. It's way more than I can cover on this video, so I'm going to put the research links over on that Shakespeare Girl blog. It's at CassidyCash.com. That's me. I'm Cassidy Cash. That's Shakespeare Girl. So if you jump over there and you click on the little button that says blog, I will have the text of this conversation we're having, this lesson on libraries in Shakespeare's time. I'll have the text written up there so you can read about it, and there's some more information there that didn't come across on video that you can read in the article. And then down at the bottom, you'll be able to download the list of research links. If you want to explore this topic further, I really encourage you to. The whole development of libraries and how we transitioned from the Great Library in Alexandria, Egypt, to the Dark Ages, where there was very little information, or certainly very little flow of information, all the way up to Renaissance England, where there was a boom of libraries and information, and just that culture shift. Hopefully, together, by studying this time period, we can bring back the idea that being educated and intelligent and doing it for yourself without needing a teacher to tell you to, we can bring that back. So hopefully you enjoyed today's episode of That Shakespeare Girl and the Did Shakespeare question of, did Shakespeare study in a library? It was certainly fun researching it and putting it together for you guys. If you enjoyed it, please hit like and subscribe so you don't miss next week's episode. And hop on over to the blog at CassidyCash.com. I've got goodies and freebies there for you guys as well when you subscribe. And there's exclusive freebie content that I only send out to email subscribers. So hopefully you're a member of that. If you are a serious Shakespearean and you really love Shakespeare and you want to take it one step further, please check out the that Shakespeare Girl membership community. For less than a few coffees a month, we have a blast. From expert interviews to virtual tours of places you can explore Shakespeare right here in the United States. It's all over there for you guys, so check that out at CassieCash.com as well. Thanks again for being here, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.